She smiled one last time at her father and said, "Don't worry, Dad. All the people up north are good people." Then 18-year-old Barrett Beck drove away from her Sturtevant, Wisconsin home. She would never come back. 25 years later, when police finally arrested the man responsible, the entire community asked one devastating question. How did his fingerprints sit in an evidence box for over 2 decades while he walked free among them? This is the story of how a cold case that haunted Wisconsin for a generation was finally solved by one detective who refused to give up. On the morning of July 17, 1990, David Beck stood at the front door of his family home on 63rd Drive in Sturtevant, Wisconsin, watching his daughter Barrett load up the family van. She'd just graduated from Case High School in Racine County a month earlier and landed her first real job doing clerical work for a major company. Sturtevant was a small, tight-knit community in southeastern Wisconsin where nothing serious ever happened. It was quiet, predictable, and safe. The kind of place completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. Barrett played violin in the Case High School orchestra. Music wasn't just a hobby. It was woven into every plan she had for her future. College was coming, and wherever the path led, music was going with her. Just weeks into her new job, she was selected to attend a 3-day computer training seminar in Appleton, Wisconsin, approximately 130 miles north of Sturtevant. For a girl barely a month out of a high school, this felt significant. A work trip, a hotel, adults treating her like a colleague. David and Diane Beck helped her pack the family van, went over the route, and tried not to worry too much. Before she left, David did one practical thing. He wrote down the van's mileage in a small notebook for her employer's travel reimbursement. Just a few numbers on paper. He had no idea he'd just created the one piece of evidence that would later prove something terrible had happened to his daughter. Barrett left home that Tuesday morning and made one quick stop at her boyfriend Kurt's house in Sturtevant. A short visit, a few words about the seminar, maybe a kiss goodbye, and then she pointed the van north on Interstate 41. The route to Appleton passed through Fond du Lac, a city of approximately 40,000 people sitting halfway across her journey. A natural stopping point. Nothing unusual. Around noon on July 17th, she pulled into Forest Mall on North Main Street in Fond du Lac and walked into the Walgreens drugstore. Security cameras captured her entering. She selected a few cosmetics and carried them to the checkout counter. The register printed a receipt. Time-stamped 12:07 p.m. To the cashier working that Tuesday afternoon, Barrett was just another customer. Calm, smiling, completely at ease. The cashier would later tell police that Barrett seemed happy, even excited. She tucked the receipt into her purse, picked up her shopping bag, and walked out into the bright July sun in the Forest Mall parking lot. Behind her, the Walgreens continued its business. The security cameras recorded normal afternoon traffic. In front of her, in that parking lot in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, 18-year-old Barrett Beck simply vanished. That evening, back in Sturtevant, David and Diane Beck sat by the phone and waited. Barrett had promised to call from her hotel in Appleton as soon as she checked in. An hour passed, then 2. Darkness fell over Racine County. David checked the clock repeatedly. Nothing came. By 10 o'clock, when the phone still hadn't rung, David called the hotel in Appleton. The answer stopped them cold. Barrett Beck had never checked in. Her room was empty, no record of her arrival, no messages, nothing. David and Diane began making desperate calls, co-workers, friends from Case High School, Kurt. One by one, the answers came back identical. Nobody had seen her. Nobody had heard from her. She'd simply stopped existing somewhere between that Walgreens and Fond du Lac and the road north. On Friday morning, July 19, 1990, 2 days after Barrett vanished, a tip came into the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Office. A van matching the description had been spotted in a parking lot on South Main Street. Officers responded immediately. They found it in the Kmart parking lot at 1241 South Main Street, just 3 blocks from the Forest Mall Walgreens. The Beck family van. The doors were locked. Not abandoned in a hurry, locked tight. The way you lock a vehicle when you're finished and leaving deliberately. Whoever parked this van had the keys. They'd locked up and walked away calmly into Fond du Lac. If someone else had Barrett's keys, where was Barrett? Investigators began processing the interior, and what they found turned a missing person case into something far darker. The radar detector was gone. The stereo ripped out. Initial assumption, theft. That theory collapsed within minutes. Barrett's belongings were still inside. All of them. Her shoes. Her dress for the seminar. Her clothes, toiletries, everything. A thief doesn't rip out a stereo and leave personal items untouched. Something else had happened. Then came the details that made investigators' blood run cold. Cigarette ash. Thick accumulations on the floor. Not a quick smoke. The kind of ash that builds up over hours. Whoever sat in this van had been there a long time. Windows up, doors locked, just sitting and smoking. The scent of stale tobacco was embedded deep in the fabric. A smell that never belonged in the Beck van. Barrett didn't smoke. David and Diane didn't smoke. Someone had been locked inside this vehicle for hours. Waiting, hiding, or both. Then the clothing. A red shirt on the floor. Torn, not casually tossed, but ripped. A pink dress across the back seat. A pair of pantyhose tied into a deliberate knot. Together, they told a story investigators weren't ready to hear. Then they found the ring. Kurt had given Barrett a sapphire ring she wore every day. It wasn't on her hand, but it was in the van, tucked underneath the driver's side floor mat, placed there deliberately. The stereo was gone. The radar detector was gone. But a genuine sapphire ring, jewelry with actual value, had been hidden instead of taken. Why? 2 cups, one from McDonald's, one from Burger King. Investigators confirmed Barrett had stopped at McDonald's before leaving Sturtevant. 1 stop, 1 cup. She'd never been to Burger King, but there it was. And the fingerprints on that Burger King cup? Nobody knew whose they were. Yet, then came the mileage. David Beck had written down the van's odometer reading before Barrett left. Investigators compared it to what it displayed now. The van had been driven 461 miles more than it should have been. Fond du Lac was roughly 100 miles from Sturtevant. Even accounting, for every documented stop, the math didn't work. Someone had taken this van and driven it extensively across Wisconsin before returning it to this parking lot. Investigators stood there looking at everything. Locked doors, a hidden ring, ash from a stranger's cigarettes, a cup from a restaurant Barrett never visited, 461 unexplained miles. Barrett wasn't in the van. Barrett was nowhere. And whoever had her keys had walked away like they had somewhere else to be. Within days, Barrett's face was everywhere across southeastern Wisconsin. Flyers in post offices, gas stations, grocery stores. Her photograph on semi-trailers rolling down Wisconsin highways. A $75,000 reward was announced. Over 100 volunteers searched fields and ditches in the August heat. The searches turned up nothing. Tips went cold. Days became weeks. Still nothing. On August 22, 1990, exactly 5 weeks after Barrett disappeared, a farmer driving near Waupun, Wisconsin, noticed something in a ditch along County Road G. He slowed his truck. stopped, got out and walked closer. Just the sound of wind across a cornfield and a terrible stillness. He called the Dodge County Sheriff's Office. Officers arrived and discovered human remains in the roadside ditch. Weeks of summer heat had made identification impossible. Dental records were pulled, comparisons made. The remains were Barrett Ann Beck. She'd been there for 5 weeks, 15 miles from where her van was found, hidden from everyone looking for her. The medical examiner went to work. Precise cause of death couldn't be confirmed, but the examination pointed in one direction: a deliberate act that ended her life. Based on the remains, Barrett had almost certainly been killed on July 17, 1990, the same day she disappeared. She hadn't been held captive. It ended the same day it began. Then came the detail that reframed everything. A piece of fabric had been used to prevent her from seeing. Someone had stopped in the middle of whatever was happening and tied fabric across the eyes of an 18-year-old girl from Sturtevant. That wasn't panic. That was a choice made calmly by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The case was now officially a homicide. Investigators focused on men with criminal histories across southeastern Wisconsin. 5 to 7 persons of interest were identified. Interviews conducted. Alibis checked. Names written down and crossed off. None led anywhere. The case file grew thicker but no closer to resolution. Barrett's classmates did what young people do when grief has nowhere to go. They raised money. They planted a cherry tree outside the music room at Case High School. A living thing, rooted where Barrett had played violin. They announced the Barrett Beck Memorial Music Scholarship, awarded each year to a student planning to study music. The tree grew. The scholarship continued. The case file stayed open. But the killer had already left himself behind. Inside that van, he'd left physical traces, collected, bagged, labeled, placed into an evidence box. The problem wasn't missing evidence. The problem was simpler and more maddening. Nobody had looked at it correctly yet. And nobody would for 23 years. When an investigation has no answers, it looks for patterns. Investigators focused on a man with a criminal history we'll call Craig. Known for stealing cars and driving them long distances. He seemed perfect for the 461 unexplained miles. Then Craig was arrested for robbing a bank. Officers found a woman's hairbrush with blonde hair in his belongings. Barrett had blonde hair. One of Craig's acquaintances claimed Craig had confessed to killing Barrett. Craig became the prime suspect. Resources shifted. This was the break they'd been waiting for. Then it hit a wall. Craig's fingerprints didn't match a single print in Barrett's van. Not one. He denied everything. Without a fingerprint match and without his confession, prosecutors held back. Charging him and losing meant he could never be charged again. So they waited. A decade passed, then most of another. David and Diane Beck kept their vigil. Every July 17th, they drove to West Lawn Memorial Park in Racine. The first anniversary, the 5th, the 10th, the 20th. The world moved on. They kept returning to that same patch of ground because it was all they could do. Then, in 2008, the entire story collapsed. The acquaintance who'd claimed Craig confessed admitted he'd fabricated everything. A personal grudge. He'd listened when police spoke, picked up details never made public, and built a lie precise enough to redirect an entire murder investigation for 18 years. Craig had spent 2 decades as the prime suspect in a murder he had nothing to do with. While the real killer went to work, came home to Kenosha, and existed in complete safety. In 2013, Fox 6 News and Milwaukee ran a cold case segment. Barrett Beck's story was featured. A few minutes of airtime, an old photograph, the brief facts. 23 years without an answer. When Detective Nate Lamont with the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Office saw that broadcast, he made a decision. He walked into the evidence room, pulled the Barrett Beck case file, and started reading. The fingerprints from the van had been compared against Craig and early suspects. No match. Then filed, placed in a box, and shelved for 23 years. By 2013, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, AFIS, was a national database containing prints from millions with criminal records. In 1990, fingerprint work meant manually comparing ridge patterns against a limited set of suspects. You could only find what you already knew to look for. Detective Lamont submitted those prints to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. The lab uploaded them to AFIS. Within weeks, the system returned a match that would shock the community. 9 fingerprints, lifted from 5 items inside Barrett's van, all belonging to one person, Dennis Brett Brantner, Kenosha, Wisconsin. The name had never appeared in the case file, not once in 23 years. He'd never been a suspect, never questioned, never looked at whatsoever. A complete stranger to everyone who'd spent decades trying to find Barrett's killer. But his fingerprints had been in her van from the very first day. Detective Lamont built a profile. Brantner had been driving trucks since 1979. Long-haul routes. His routes passed through Fond du Lac County regularly. In summer 1990, he'd been living in Green Lake, Wisconsin, roughly 30 miles from where Barrett's body was found. His criminal record went back years. Car theft. Burglary. One file entry made Lamont pause. In 1989, 1 year before Barrett's murder, Brantner stole a Cadillac in Green Lake. He drove it over 900 miles. When police recovered it weeks later, they found large piles of cigarette ash pressed into the seats. The same residue found in Barrett's van. Same behavior, same geography, 1 year earlier, then 1994. Brantner's second wife finished her shift in Lake County, Illinois, and walked to her car. Brantner was already inside, hidden in the back seat, waiting. When she got in, he produced a knife. He forced her to drive where he commanded. Hours of captivity. She escaped when they stopped for gas, and she ran inside screaming. He was arrested for unlawful restraint and battery. The car wasn't the target. The car was the trap. An enclosed space where a woman had nowhere to run and no one could hear her scream. For Dennis Brantner, a vehicle wasn't transportation. It was a hunting ground. In March 2014, Detective Lamont and investigators drove to Kenosha. They brought Brantner to an interview room at the police department. When they showed 59-year-old Dennis Brantner a photograph of 18-year-old Barrett Beck, his composure broke. The color drained. His hands became unsteady. He began to cry. Not the slow grief of difficult news, the sudden collapse of someone ambushed by something they'd kept buried for 24 years. It wasn't sadness. It was exposure. He denied everything. Never met Barrett. Never in Fond du Lac that day, never in her van. When told his fingerprints were found inside, he couldn't answer. When pressed on whether he'd harmed Barrett, the denial came out fractured. If I did, I did, and if I did, I don't know. Not admission, not denial, something in between, but one detail made the case impossible to escape. Among the items with Brantner's prints was the cosmetics box. The products Barrett purchased at Walgreens on July 17th at 12:07 p.m. Fresh purchases. Handled only by her within the hour. For Brantner's fingerprints to be on that box, he hadn't simply found an abandoned van. He'd found Barrett. At that mall, at that moment. Close enough to touch what she was carrying on the last afternoon of her life. On March 27, 2015, Dennis Brantner walked out of Kenosha County Courthouse after a routine hearing. Just another Thursday. He stepped outside and found Detective Lamont waiting. They arrested him on the spot as cameras recorded everything. First-degree intentional homicide. Barrett Ann Beck. July 17, 1990. During booking, a deputy found something in Brantner's left boot. A plastic bag containing 37 oxycodone pills. Hidden. Carried across county lines. 25 years after Barrett's murder, he was still hiding contraband in his boots. Bond was set at $1 million. The arrest made headlines across Wisconsin. As news became public, 3 former co-workers from a Kenosha welding plant came forward independently. Brantner had kept a photograph clipped inside his toolbox, a young blonde woman. He'd told them she was his girlfriend. When Barrett's face appeared on news coverage, all 3 recognized her immediately. Dennis Brantner had carried Barrett's photograph to work for years, shown it to colleagues, claimed as his own a girl he'd murdered. The trial began June 2016. More than 2 weeks of testimony, over 40 witnesses. The prosecution laid out fingerprint evidence, behavioral patterns, the matching cigarette ash, the 1994 abduction, the photograph in his toolbox. But the defense had a weapon prosecutors couldn't counter. The Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory had lost evidence. The jacket. The Burger King cup with Brantner's fingerprint. Key items collected in 1990 had simply disappeared from storage. The defense asked the question prosecutors couldn't answer. If the evidence was so solid, where was it? Why couldn't it be retested today? The jury deliberated 3 days. 1 juror became ill. The foreman sent word they could not agree. Judge Sharp declared a mistrial. The High District Attorney announced he would retry the case, but preparing uncovered a legal trap. Because of how Wisconsin's statute of limitations applied, a conviction on a lesser charge carried the risk Brantner could avoid punishment entirely. After painful consultations with the Beck family, they found another path. In February 2018, Dennis Brantner entered an Alford plea. Under Wisconsin law, he didn't admit guilt. He simply acknowledged the evidence was strong enough for likely conviction. He accepted a sentence for second-degree reckless homicide, 10 years maximum. He never said he killed Barrett Beck. The closest he came was that fractured sentence. If I did, I did. 10 years. Before delivering it, Judge Wirtz looked directly at Brantner and said, "The public needs to be protected from you." The sentence would run consecutively after 6.5 years for the drug charges. Under older laws, he'd be eligible for parole after just 2.5 years of the murder. Sentence, District Attorney Tony told reporters, "In almost every respect, 10 years feels too little." Ben Beck, Barrett's brother, spoke at sentencing. This was a slow, horrible torture no family should endure. Would she be a wife, a mother, a professional musician? We will never know. David Beck paused several times to hold back tears. After 27 years, there is no preparation you can make for this day. Outside Case High School in Sturtevant, a cherry tree still stands near the music room. Planted in 1991 on what would have been Barrett's 19th birthday. Every year, the Barrett Beck Memorial Music Scholarship is awarded to a student planning to study music. On the morning she left, Barrett smiled and told her father not to worry. All the people up north are good people. She was 18, a month out of high school, excited about the future. She believed it completely. The man who proved her wrong never admitted what he did. But the evidence speaks. 9. Fingerprints. A cosmetics box she bought an hour before she died. 461 unexplained miles. 23 years of freedom while her family waited. Barrett Beck deserved better than 10 years. She deserved a full life. If you want to make sure cases like Barrett's are never forgotten, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Share this video so her story reaches people who need to hear it. And leave a like to help us keep bringing you the cases that matter. Thank you for watching.